Bubble Base is the fattest character in SpongeBob, and he literally flattens the people he sits on. But how much does he actually weigh? Most would guess a few hundred pounds. But the answer is a lot stranger than that. Because he lives underwater, he floats, so he weighs close to nothing. But if he weighs nothing, how is he flattening people? And his legs are way too thin to support anything over 100 pounds.
And finally, one deep sea donut!
Both facts are true. Both answers are impossible. So what's actually going on? To weigh anything, you need two things: how big it is and what it's made of. But Bubble Base needs a third one because he's underwater, which we'll get to later. Let's start with how big he is. There's a problem straight away because nobody in Bikini Bottom has ever been measured. Except once. In 1999, the show put SpongeBob's driver's license on screen. 2 numbers on it, 4 inches tall and 1 ounce. That means he's mostly empty space. Do the math and SpongeBob comes out about 7 times lighter than water. That's not a body, that's a sponge, which is exactly what he's supposed to be. So the number on that card isn't made up. The writers actually calculated out what a 4-inch sponge would actually weigh and printed it, which means we can use real fish biology on him and it'll hold. And it means we can measure everyone else. Line them up next to SpongeBob and you get their size. Bubble Base comes out at 6 inches tall and he's nearly as wide as he is tall. After doing the math, the space inside him is around 1 liter. You could pour Bubble Base into a milk carton and still have room.
But, actually, the show doesn't act like these characters are 4 inches tall. They sit in normal chairs. They drive normal cars. If that's the real size, Bubble Base is 5'6", not 6 inches.
Wrong. If Bubble Base was 5'6", then how come this quote-unquote life-size chair SpongeBob sits on is not way taller if SpongeBob, who's 4 inches tall, which his literal driver's license says?
No, you're wrong, because if the sponges are to scale with the actual—
Get out! So we know his size, but 1 liter of feathers and 1 liter of concrete weigh completely different amounts, and right now Bubble Base could be either. He's a base, and that matters because real base have been taken apart and weighed, not fish in general. Base. It comes out in 4 different parts. The biggest by a mile is the water. About 70% of a bass is just water. Second is muscle, about 1/6 of him. Third is bone, a small hard fraction. And the fourth, at dead last, is fat. About 7%. The fattest character in SpongeBob is made of a fish that's 7% fat. Now weigh those 4 parts against each other. Bone is heavy, muscle is a bit heavy, fat is light, water is water. Add them up in those proportions and you get how heavy a bass is for its size. So 1 liter of that in theory should be just under 2 pounds of bubble bass. About what 1 liter of water weighs, which makes sense because 70% of him is water. That's the fattest character in SpongeBob, but 2 pounds is how much of him there is. It isn't what he weighs because we still haven't taken off how the water's holding up. The third factor called buoyancy, and that's the one that significantly changes how much he weights. On dry land, a set of scales reads all of you. Underwater, it reads all of you minus whatever the water is holding up, and water holds up exactly the weight of whatever you shove out of the way. A fish shoves out its own volume, and a fish weighs barely more than that same amount of seawater, about 5% more. So the water takes 95% of him. 5% is all that's left pressing down. And that 5% is handled by an organ called a swim bladder, a bag of gas, about 1/20th of the animal whose whole job is canceling it out. And this is the thing that makes Bubble Base special, see? But between the water and the bladder, a normal fish weighs nothing at all. That's why they hang there. Which means if Bubble Bass is a normal fish, he weighs nothing, and this video is over. Except we've all watched him sit on plankton. He sits on plankton and flattens him. His house catches fire, he falls out of a window, and he lands on plankton and flattens him again. He squashes Squidward without noticing. It's a running gag, back season after season, on purpose. And you cannot flatten anything if you weigh nothing. So his swim bladder isn't working, which means there's something inside him heavy enough to beat the ocean, and we still have no idea what it is. The oldest joke they have, big guy squashes small guy, is the only reason we know his bladder is broken. So take the 2 pounds, take away everything the water is holding up, and what's left pressing down on the floor is about 1.5 ounces. The fattest character in SpongeBob standing on a set of bathroom scales comes out about the same as SpongeBob, but there's a problem with it. Every number that went into it came out of a cartoon. If any of them is wrong, all of it is wrong. And if it's right, we've got a base that's denser than a base is supposed to get, so it needs to hold up against something that isn't a cartoon. The first place to look is an episode from 2006 where it has no business saying anything about marine biology. There's a second driver's license in this show. It's Patrick's. It turns up in an episode called Driven to Tears, and it says 6 inches tall, 2 ounces. That puts Patrick at about 1/7 the density of water, same as SpongeBob, which should be impossible because Patrick is a starfish. Real starfish are stiff and mineralized. They sit at about the density of water, or heavier, nowhere near 1/7 of it. So those numbers can't be how much of them there is. Read that way, they're just wrong. But there's one reading where they're all right. A set of scales underwater can't measure how much of you there is. All it can measure is what's left after the water takes its share, which is exactly what those licenses are recording. That's why the numbers are so small. SpongeBob 1 ounce, Patrick 2 ounces, and Bubble Bass, who has never held a license in his life, 1.5 ounces, right between them. But both of those numbers came out of the same cartoon, and a cartoon agreeing with itself proves nothing. I need something from outside it, something that has never heard of SpongeBob. And when I ran his measurements through the formula field biologists actually used, the number came back so far off I had to check whether I'd made an error. See? The standard fisheries fatness index puts him at 17 times a cannonball, but it assumes every fish grows like a perfect cube, which no fish does. So here's the one biologists still use in the field today. Which means whatever's packed into Bubble Bass isn't something you find in a fish. You give it a length and it tells you what a healthy base that long ought to weigh. So give it Bubble Bass. It says 44 grams. He's 860, 20 times heavier than he should be. A healthy fish scores 100 on that scale. Bubble Bass scores just under 2,000. Turn it around and it gets worse. A base that genuinely weighed what he weighs would be about 15 inches long. He's 6. That isn't a fish that ate too much. That's a fish made of something else. And buried in that equation is the thing that kills one of those 2 bikini bottoms. That equation comes with a warning on it. It's only tested on base of about 6 inches and up. On the license scale, Bubble Bass is 6 inches. HE sits just inside the range where it works. On the other one, you'd be stretching a base equation 10 times past the biggest fish it was ever built from. So we take the small one, not because it's tidier, because it's the only version of Bikini Bottom where Bubble Bass is a fish you could legally write on a survey sheet, which leaves the 7% and every source calls him obese. The show plays it that way constantly, and the wikis say it in the first sentence. 7%, that's what a base is, even a well-fed one. 7% fat against about 20% muscle and bone. And fat is lighter than seawater. Every bit of fat on a fish makes it float better, not sink harder. It's the one thing in the whole body that the ocean actively lifts. So a genuinely fat Bubble Bass wouldn't crush anything. He'd bob. He doesn't bob, he crushes. So whatever is filling that leader has to come from the other end, the muscle and the bone, the 2 heaviest things a fish is made of. Strength is listed as one of his abilities. He throws Squidward around like a rag doll. He shoves a whole crowd aside without appearing to try. In Bubble Bass's tab, Squidward has to physically beat him in a jousting match to make him give in. That's not a soft character. Bubble Bass is muscle and bone packed into a sphere and wearing a tank top, and the fat joke this show has been running since 1999 is the only thing about him that isn't true. The show has been getting the biology right for 25 years, and the one number nobody ever thought to check, how he actually compares to real bass, is the strangest one of all. The biggest largemouth bass ever caught weighed 22 pounds. Georgia, 1932, tied once in Japan, never beaten in over 90 years. An ordinary largemouth runs about 5 pounds. Bubble Bass is 2. By the standards of his own species, the fattest man in Bikini Bottom is a small fish, below average, one you'd throw straight back. He's the roundest fish anybody has ever calculated, and a fish that wouldn't place in a local competition, both at once. Because he isn't big, he's packed. Which means both of the impossible answers we started with were right. He does weigh close to nothing. 1.5 ounces is close to nothing. And he does flatten people, because plankton is 1/2 inch tall, and 1.5 ounces landing on 1/2 inch is plenty. The only thing anybody ever got wrong was what's inside him. It was never fat, it was muscle and bone, packed so tight that the 1/20th the ocean can't lift is enough to crush somebody. And he still remembers exactly how many pickles he ordered.